Thank you for joining us today, this Tuesday, for our sales meeting. This is going to be the final installment of our shift series, potentially one of the most important, called Bulletproof the Transaction. And we will be joined today by our broker, Andrew Ginter. Many of you may know him. I'm going to quickly go through some upcoming events. Bear with me. All right, so sorry. Last night we had our career night on the west side. Thank you everyone who joined us, especially Maria Etter. She was in the room. So thank you for being there and sharing your insights. And also thank you to the Sozier team and Pete Formica for inviting people. Our next career nights in October will be back in our offices. They are going to be on October 17th and 24th. We'll be sure to get the links and further information out to you guys soon though. Next, this is actually today, right after the sales meeting at 11 o'clock, a 3-hour CE class for fair housing. I believe you're still able to register, so if you don't have anything going on after this and you want to knock out some of your core CE, feel free to register. It is free again, and it is for your core CE, and it's on Zoom. So if you're already sitting in front of your computer today, you could just stay on for this if you want. Some upcoming training that we have our business planning clinic. All of October is centered around the business planning clinic. It is super important to make sure you start off 2023 the right way in setting your goals. If you use the code KWGM agent when signing up on Eventbrite, you'll get $10 off. It's also 6 hours of CE. You get lunch and you walk out with your business plan ready for the next year. Don't know what could be better than that. We shared this last week as well, but KWGM is currently the #2 market center in the country year to date for profit sharing. So that is out of almost 900 market centers. We out of Cleveland, Ohio are #2. So if you're not getting your unfair share through profit share, join us for the KW effect, where profit share, no, he calls himself KW evangelist, something like that. Aaron Kaufman, awesome guy, is going to be leading a conversation on just the value of KW and how you can share that with others and really grow your downline. So Julia will share the link for that in the chat. Tickets are, seats are limited for this. It's open to all KWs in the area, so be sure to get yours as soon as possible. This is going to be at the Aviator Event Center in Cleveland. Next is our trunk or treat event. I sent an email about this yesterday. We have promos that you can share out to your clients. We would love for you guys to join us. If you want to do a trunk, you can sign up for that. If you want to share this out to your clients, you're more than welcome to. We have the promos that we can send you to send to them. And also, if you want to submit your chili for the chili cook-off, you can reach out to us as well. It will be $10 to taste all chilies and vote on the best one, but all proceeds go to KW Cares. It does not cost anything to enter your chili. So if you want to enter your chili, you think you have the best one, please reach out to us and we can get you signed up. And then see you Friday. For those of you who got your tickets to the clam bake, we are so excited. We have some awesome raffle gifts starting to pile up in our office that will make their way to Mayfield. We are so excited for this. It's KW Cares' largest fundraiser of the year, and we hope to see you there. All right, click. So some partner updates. I see Sean Hadley, if anyone else is there.
Good morning, everybody. All right, so we'll chat about interest rates here to start off with. So the Federal Reserve Board met last Wednesday, and as we talked about on Tuesday, the expectation that we're going to bump rates 0.75%. They did exactly that. The immediate impact of that was somewhat ho-hum. Everybody knew it was coming. Interest rates had already, mortgage rates that is, had already adjusted up with the expectation that that would happen, and then it did. Then kind of a day or so of not a whole lot happening, and then international stuff, Europe, UK specifically, kind of panicking about inflation. And being that we have a world economy, these things matter and push rates up even a bit more since last week. So 30-year average is nearing or right around 7%, believe it or not. This is pretty much at a 20-year high. We're hoping to get a little bit of recoup, kind of a rebound a little bit, but pretty much for somebody with, you know, even very good credit to almost perfect, it's going to be right around 7%, at least in the top half of the sixes. So obviously we're communicating with buyers. This isn't a shock to anybody that we're already working with. We've communicated where rates have been and where they could be, and this has been on the horizon here for a little bit. So over the next couple of weeks, we're going to get into a bit more detail on the next topic, and that is seller credits. So over the past certainly 60 days and especially the last couple of weeks, we're seeing a lot of offers that would have often been in second place or lower. We're seeing FHA and VA offers get accepted. We're seeing contracts get accepted under list price. And we're seeing seller credits coming back much more frequently. And we're going to talk about some strategies in the next few meetings, kind of like we did 2 meetings ago with our extended sort of chat time. And that is, using seller credits, not maybe just to pay closing costs, but maybe to buy down the interest rates by points, or a temporary buy down, or PMI lump sum payments. So we'll get into detail that in the meetings to come, but just wanted to give you kind of a quick preview and quick overview of that. But Chris and Don, anything you guys want to add?
To put this massive and quick uptick in interest rates in perspective, just over the past year on a $400,000 loan amount, that payment would have increased almost $1,000 with where interest rates are today versus where they were a year ago. So that should put this in perspective and how quick and how high things have run up. But people still buy homes, so people don't need to sell homes, and we're here to help them.
Yeah, excuse me. To go off of what Sean was saying, just, seller credits and kind of the power of it. We've noticed recently with the volatility in the market, discount points are not quite as expensive as they normally would be. Anyone that's a little bit rate sensitive, you get a 1 or 2% seller credit. We use that towards points. We can buy that rate down maybe to a percentage that they're a little more comfortable with. At the very least, they feel like, they're getting a rate that they're getting a deal, so to say, and they didn't miss out on the rates at a lower point.
And we're going to consult every buyer with every option. I think some in the financial industries, a lot of times people give options more or less to confuse them and push them in a certain direction. I hope you have the confidence in us that we're going to give everyone options and educate them, for lack of a better term, and pros and cons of everything that's available to them. And in this market, there's going to be a lot more decisions to make and better options to lay out in front of them. So we'll help your customers with that. So if there's anything you all need, just always feel free to reach out to any of us. Thanks.
Thank you, guys. And now we are going to kick it over to Tiffany, who is joining us this morning. GM Title.
Good morning, everybody. I know you're used to seeing Jade, so thank you so much for having me. I'm the operations manager at GM Title. I wanted to talk to you guys this morning about sellers' proceeds and 2 parts of that. So seller information sheets, you'll hear from title companies quite a bit, and seller proceeds. So it's really important, if you're the listing agent, to stress to the seller how important it is that they fill out their pre-closing documents. At GM Title, we have a secure system that we use. It sweeps our network every day and sends out a secure link to your sellers to log in. They create a login and password. They fill out all of their information there. We cannot clear a file to close without it. We can't clear title without it. We can't order payoffs without it. It's super, super important. So if you're working with a seller, just let them know, hey, the title company is going to be sending you this. It could be in different forms if it's not us. Sometimes it's just an old-fashioned sheet of paper they fill out and send back. We like to have a secure version, so that's what we do. And the second part of that is proceeds. So as part of the pre-closing documents, we ask the seller if they want to give us how they want their proceeds dispersed, they can do so at that time. It's really important to remember that the IRS and every single underwriter, our boss at a title company is our clients, of course, you guys, but also underwriters. We have to follow their rules, as well as the federal government, the IRS, RESPA, and so on. The IRS requires that we disperse funds exactly how the seller is entitled. So if they're entitled in a trust, an LLC, as husband and wife, things like that, we have to disperse however they are entitled. We've been getting a lot of pushback from sellers where they say, well, I want the check made out to me. I'm the trustee. We're not allowed to do that, unfortunately. So what we tell the sellers, because we call every buyer and seller we work with at the beginning of the transaction, is we see you're entitled in a trust. Do you have an account? at a bank in the trust. If they say no, we let them know you're going to need to open one because we have to disperse the funds to you in the name of the trust. And oftentimes they're not happy with that. We understand the frustration, but we just want to make sure, and we try to educate them to say, you know, this isn't our decision. It's the IRS that requires this, as well as our underwriters. So if you're working as a listing agent, it's just really important, if you know they're entitled with an entity, I would just encourage them to say, hey, do you have an account for this entity? If not, you're going to likely need to open one, and then just send them in our directions and we can answer any questions that they might have.
Awesome. Thank you, Tiffany. And
Thank you so much.
Tiffany's contact information is up there. So if you ever have any questions on this or get back to thinking about it and realize you don't understand it, feel free to reach out to Tiffany or Jade at any time. They're super helpful and great resources for us.
Thank you, Carrie.
All right, we are going to kick it right off to Andrew Ginter to talk about tactic 12 of preparing for the shift, bulletproof the transaction, issues and solutions. Issues and solving them is something that Andrew is very familiar with. So without further ado, I will let Andrew take it away, please.
All right. Thank you, guys. I want to start off first and just reiterate a couple of things that were already talked about. One being the KW Effect class that's coming up. We're coming up on a time period that the same reason we're talking about what we're talking about, being that we're going into a different market, is also a perfect opportunity for us to be going out and sharing why this is a better place to do business than most. So come to that class and take the opportunity to learn great ways to figure out how to talk to the agents you're doing business with currently, the agents you're already friends with in your market area, to help get them here and to be able to do better business over what we have coming. And then also just to piggyback on what Sean, Don, and Chris said, again, going into a different marketplace, it's super, super important. I'm going to touch on it while I'm talking, but I want to reiterate how important it is that our buyers are working with people who know what they're doing. So those two things are just stick out to me as based on what I'm talking about today. So we are going to get into how to bulletproof your transaction. And at the end of the day, there's really just a couple of things that matter most. And if you can get those things right, everything else will kind of fall in line. So much of it is about understanding your client's perspective and setting the right expectations around things. For the last couple of years, we've had sellers with a perspective that's pretty fantastic to deal with. You know, having a listing a year ago was a pretty fantastic situation. You didn't have to do a whole lot of hard work because sellers were happy. So everything was good. And on the buyer side, you had to do a lot of hard work to get under contract, but once it was under contract, buyers were happy. So it was good. So they were on the same end of the continuum. What we're starting to see happen now, and is only going to continue, is you put a deal together and a seller immediately thinks that they could have done better, and a buyer immediately thinks they could have done better. So now you've got a buyer and seller who are miles apart, as opposed to both marching towards the same finish line and happy to do so. So understanding that at its core, like that's at the core of your client moving forward. And so it's important that we are talking to them in a way that helps communicate with them as though that's their perspective. It's important that moving forward, we have good solutions around the hurdles that are up and coming, because these hurdles are going to feel more insurmountable than they have in the past. So it's really important that we're, I guess, so to speak, kind of paving the road over those hurdles well in advance of their existence. Where in the past, it was much easier to get around those hurdles. So those hurdles were a couple inches tall as opposed to 20 feet tall. And that's, like I said, really a matter of expectation setting, good communication. We're going to talk through some things about how to have good communication systems in place, good scripting around specific places in the transaction where we know there are problems and we know there are difficulties. So let's dive into those. We're going to start on the buyer side, and then we're going to go to the seller side. And then lastly, we're going to talk through communication, which is really the same, whether it's buyer or seller. So on the seller side, or I'm sorry, on the buyer side, the big hurdles we're going to discuss are just general buyer's remorse, inspections and repairs, and financing. I think those are the big three. And so we'll start with buyer's remorse. When it comes to buyer's remorse, in the recent past, we've seen some buyer's remorse. I know I've talked to plenty of agents over the last couple of years, wanting to know what to do about the fact that there was a house that was listed for $299. There was 14 offers, and their buyer won with an escalation clause at $362. And when you call the buyer, you can hear it in their voice. Their first, you tell them that their offer was accepted, and it's at $362, and they immediately have this kind of sinking tone in their voice, as though they feel like, oh gosh, what did I just do? I feel like I overpaid. Moving forward, that buyer's remorse is going to come from a much less controllable place. In the past, that thought about overpaying was something you could overcome out front by really digging into how important it is that they buy the house, at what price it's really important to them, all that stuff. So that conversation's already done if you did it well. Now what happens is they get a house under contract, and their friend at work tells them about the news article they read yesterday about how home prices are declining and the best time to buy is going to be summer of 23 or whatever. And now there's all these things that are out of your control that are floating around your clients. And it's super important that we know that that's happening. For one, if you don't know that's happening, I'm here to tell you that's happening. And now secondly is how we handle it, right? And so we need to be able to combat buyer remorse in a very different way than we have in the past. And it's around being able to really help them cement their decision so that when they are encountered with these things, they have the confidence in their decision that they can overcome them, because you're not going to be there standing next to them to explain why it was a good idea to buy that house versus wait versus buy the other house they saw last week or any of that. So a couple of things that are really important around that is talking with them about the long-term advantage as opposed to the short-term potential failure, right? Because the failure, the idea of failure in their head is all about, well, could I have gotten a better deal on a house that I like just as much 3 months from now? It's fairly irrational because there's no way to know the answer. However, what you can kind of plant their decision in, and confidently, is the long-term aspect of it, which is kind of meeting their motivation as to why it is they wanted to move and why it is they want that house, right? I just had people, this is clients of my own, who have been shopping. I met them 1.5 years ago, and they had been looking for a house for a long time before that. And they finally have a house under contract, which is unbelievable, I think, but they finally have one under contract. And the thing I have said to them multiple times, and it's finally registered because they said it when we got this house under contract 1.5 weeks ago, was the idea that, like, their continuous fear of picking the wrong house in the past was finally overcome by their continuous fear of not buying a house at all. Because the reason they wanted to buy a house was to change their living situation based on the expense of the apartment they were in, and a daughter that's now 3 years old, and they're living in a little 2-bedroom apartment. So those things became more important to them than being afraid of making the wrong choice. And I think if we can keep our clients focused on a long-term win as opposed to the short-term opportunity to have maybe done better, that's really important. So you have to ground them in the motivation they have already, and you can do it with some math, which isn't that hard. We've seen all the stuff on Facebook where loan officers are putting it out there all day long about how much better it is to buy a house at this rate today at this price versus a lower price in the future at this higher rate, or what, like, all that stuff theoretically matters, but I think it doesn't overcome people's fear the same way their own motivation does. Then on the investor side, I think this is one where we've missed the boat, myself included. I'll tell a story quickly to kind of plant this. I had a conversation with a guy a few months back who's an owner of a bunch of market centers in New York. And we were talking about something completely different, and then we kind of went off the rails and talked about other things. And the one thing he said to me, he's a professional real estate investor. He owns a bunch of commercial strip malls and apartment complexes, that sort of thing. And he said to me, the biggest regret I have was all the deals I talked myself out of over the years. And then he explained why. And the biggest explanation, the part that really stuck for me of his explanation was the fact that even to overpay for something today puts you in a situation where 10 years from now, when rents are higher, that thing is a great deal because your basis never changes. You know, if you go out and buy a 4-unit building today for 400 and the cap rate's only 7.5% or 6% or something, and you tell yourself like, it's not that great. In Cleveland, we should be at 10. But then to look at it and say, well, what about in 5 years when those units, instead of renting for $850, rent for $1050? Now all of a sudden you've got a much better opportunity at that same basis. So keep that in mind. I mean, those are both kind of long-term strategies. And if you can keep people focused on those long-term strategies instead of the short-term, maybe I could get a better deal fear, you will win and your clients will win. These conversations are not about tricking our clients into doing deals. They're about keeping them focused on the things that matter most, as opposed to the short-term stuff that will keep them away from their goals. Let's dive into inspections and repairs. I'm still a big believer in the idea that when it comes to inspections, the best thing we can be doing for our clients is really understand what it is that we're selling to people. I saw something that an agent put on Facebook the other day that said they were at the inspection with their buyer, and the dad showed up to the inspection, and they're down in the basement, and he points at something and he says, "That furnace is really old. That's going to have to be replaced." And the agent turns and says, "Well, that's the incinerator, not the furnace." And it got me thinking, I hope that none of us are that dad. I hope that we all have a very clear understanding about what it is we're selling. And if we don't, we got to go out and find some education. You've got to get on the phone with inspectors you trust, see if you can go on an inspection or two with an agent in our office that does a lot of buyer business and does it well, and see what you can learn. I can tell you, I've learned so much in the last 15 years just going to home inspections with buyers. But it's important that you absorb that stuff. I think a lot of times as agents, we can become disinterested in that part of the process and just, sit on our phone and answer emails while the buyer's walking around with the inspector. And one, you don't learn anything, and two, you don't have any opportunity to do all the other stuff I'm about to talk about. But I think that first and foremost, if you can walk through a house with a buyer and show them all the things that are going to come up at the inspection, you won't have any problems at the inspection. And I get it that that's not something that you can go out and start doing tomorrow, but you could certainly put a plan together so that 6 months from now, you could be there. But if you don't start actively educating yourself to be better at that, then you're never going to get there. But I think that is issue number one. The amount of agents I see out there not telling their clients anything. And then there's all kinds of surprises about the fact that there's rotten boards on the deck, or the furnace is old, or the roof's in bad shape. I'm thinking to myself, how is it that this didn't become known when you looked at the house together? So that's first and foremost to me. Secondly is, I think, starting early in the process, really engaging your clients in what the purpose of an inspection is, because we will come back to a place here very soon where a buyer's understanding of an inspection is simply just a second round of negotiation. And one, I mean, that's just not true. That's not the purpose of an inspection at all. But if we don't come out and say that, they're going to have their own expectation. So make sure you really control that, and you really make sure people understand, like, we're buying the house in the condition we believe it to be in, and that's the price we're writing that we think is fair. The purpose of the inspection is, if we no longer are buying the house we thought we were buying, that's what we're renegotiating. So it's not about a doorknob that doesn't latch. It's not about stuff that was in plain sight, like I said, an old furnace or deck boards that are rotten or something like that. But you got to have that conversation up front. Now, at the inspection, this, I think, lastly, one of the really important things here is how you interact with the inspector matters. A lot of times inspectors will open up the electric panel. They'll talk about things like double taps or overfused circuits and call them fire hazards and things like that, and then close up the panel and walk away. And the buyer is standing there and with, their head is swimming. They have no idea what they just got themselves into. So it's really important that in that moment, we're there asking questions and we're there talking with the inspector, like, can you explain what that means a little bit more? I'm not sure we're clear. Can you explain what the repair would be? Because I'm not sure we're clear. Because really, really quickly, very small items can turn into massive concerns just out of misrepresentation of what's actually going on. And a lot of times it's not because the inspector's doing a bad job, but it is because the inspector is taking for granted that that's a totally normal thing to him, and he understands what it means, and the person on the other side does not. And that across the board in life, we do that all the time. If it's normal to us, it must be normal to them. So I'll say what it is, and then I'll move on. And it's not normal to them. So it's really important that we engage our inspectors and just ask questions. Just get them to communicate a little bit more about what they're seeing, what that means, what the repair looks like, how normal of a problem. Like, is this a thing you see in every house that was built in 1950, or is this strange? Is this more concerning than that? And then lastly, after the inspection's over, we have to be very clear with our buyers. And this comes back to knowing what you're selling. We have to be very clear with our buyers about what they should be, what's concerning and what's not, and really asking questions to get them to communicate well to you, because a lot of times the things they're concerned about really aren't that big of a deal, but they're hung up on them for whatever reason, whether it's because it's something their uncle told them they should be concerned about, or because of something that was misunderstood at the inspection, or because it really is a big deal to them for some reason. But what we don't want to do is let our clients miss the big picture, which is back to, grounding them in their motivation of why the house that they wrote an offer on and got under contract was the right house for them. I have a story from one of the inspectors that I use all the time. He says, guy walks away from a house. This was a few years back. Guy walks away from a house because it had a bunch of ungrounded 3-prong outlets in the house. And the guy, the inspector explained what that meant. But somehow this buyer didn't receive that explanation very well, and went way overboard with it and thought it was like a really insurmountable defect to the house. Didn't buy the house. Remember, I said this is a few years ago. So 6 or 7 months later, guy shows up to do an inspection for somebody again. It's the same guy, same inspector, same buyer. Inspector didn't even realize it at the time. Shows up, sees the same guy, and they do the inspection. And now the guy's paying more money for less house. And the guy says, I wish I would have understood more about what that meant, because I should have bought that house. That's what he told the inspector that day. So it's important that they don't miss the forest for the trees, because a lot of times that happens. And again, if we're just kind of hands off about it and we let them just spin out of control with irrationality, they end up in a situation where they wish it would have been different, and we don't want to see that happen. All right, let's get into financing. I want to explain something about financing that has nothing to do with what we do with our individual clients, but just a greater understanding about the way things will be moving forward. In a market where prices are falling, the economy is changing, and we're not on an upward trajectory in those things, financing gets a little tougher, not because financing rules get tougher, but because borrowers' credit profiles aren't as good. They have less money. They're making a similar amount of money with costs going up, which just puts them in a situation where they're less capable than what we've seen. I think the last couple of years has been really unbelievable as far as how qualified most buyers have been. Difficulty getting a mortgage has not been a huge problem, but it will be at some point here. Between the fact that things are less affordable and the fact that there's not a bunch of free money floating around like there has been for the last few years. So it's really important that we have good scripts, and we are taking over the conversation about their pre-approval process right out of the gate. So this is long before you have anything under contract, that they're actually going through a pre-approval process. They haven't just gone online to Lending Tree or Rocket Mortgage and filled something out and gotten a letter, because lo and behold, they're going to find out that the taxes on the houses that they want to buy are $8,000 a year, and Lending Tree said they were going to be $2,000 a year, and now they don't qualify because people are going to be much more on the bubble than they used to be. So it's super, super important that you're talking to your clients about where they're going to get financing. And this is back to what Sean, Don, and Chris were talking about before. The things that you guys hear from these guys on Tuesdays is the perfect example of why it's important to deal with a professional instead of an order taker. Two things that I have told clients over the years often to get them to change, because they come to you with a pre-approval letter from PNC or Rocket Mortgage or whatever, and they say, "Oh, no, that's all taken care of. I don't need to, I'm all set there." There's two things that I tell them. One is how important it is, to compare one being an order taker and one being a professional. And then secondly, my concern is only that they are happy with their process when it's all over, because I want them to send me their family and friends. So the last thing I want is for their mortgage process to be difficult. So I have the same goals as they do. So why not listen to the guy that walks 40 or 50 people a year through this process, as opposed to just thinking about it yourself? So those, I think, are two things you can tell people to get them to see the light on why it's important to deal with people that we recommend. I will say, over the past few years, it's been important that people worked with lenders that agents were comfortable with, because that's how you got offers accepted. In the future, it's going to be important that people work with lenders we're comfortable with for their own sanity and happiness, as opposed to getting an offer accepted. Both are important, and I'll let you in on a secret. Both of them are the same loan officers. So please make sure that you understand that. Make sure your people understand the difference between a pre-qualification and a pre-approval. I think that's something that has been missed over the last few years, again, because things have been fairly easy. But if somebody comes to you with a pre-approval, or a pre-qualification, listing agent or representing a buyer, really important that you talk to them about what that means the loan officer is missing. A pre-qualification basically means they typed their income in a box, or told somebody over the phone what it was, and had their credit pulled. So from a credit report standpoint, they're good to go. But remember, a debt to income ratio involves debt and it involves income. So if you're telling somebody your income is $125,000, and it turns out you've been a pharmaceutical sales rep for 13 months, and you made 125 last year, you don't make $125,000, because you probably have a base of 40, and then you made a bunch of bonuses that you haven't gotten for 2 years. So again, it's super important that people understand those differences, and telling people these kinds of things will be a great way for you to get people understanding that you know more than they do, and they should take your recommendations. So I think those are, looking at my notes here real quick. Oh, I've got one other good story. This is not pertaining to pre-qualification, but more pertaining to that estimated loan statement, or whatever it's called, that goes out right at the beginning. I hope everybody knows that those are not accurate. And good loan officers do a good job of explaining to buyers the things that are on there that aren't accurate. Lenders are forced to put a bunch of stuff on there because it's a national document. It's a national regulation, and they're not completely accurate. There's things they don't include, like prorated taxes. I had an agent in our office recently have a buyer completely lose it once they went to sign the loan application, because this estimated loan statement said that they had to bring probably $8,000 more to the table than they expected to. But it's just because it's not the whole picture. And if your buyers are dealing with a dud, they're not going to be told that. They're just going to be fed the document. And what should a buyer think? They get that document, of course, they're going to assume that it's real, because why would they assume it's fake? So it's really important you have that conversation with your clients, and that they're dealing with a person that's also going to be having that conversation with them, because we can't control that part of the process, but the person they're working with can. So it's really important, like I said, that they're working with somebody who knows what they're doing, and will advocate for the process, and will advocate for both the buyer and the agent's happiness, because that matters. Now, let me dig into some seller hurdles. Really just two on the seller side that we're going to talk about, and that's just same as buyers on the remorse side, seller remorse, and then also inspection and repairs. So when it comes to seller remorse, obviously it's fairly simple. They just think to themselves, I should have done better. I could have sold it for more. We should have waited. My neighbor down the street told me such and such, whatever it was, that they just feel like they could have done better. I think when it comes to sellers, the best thing we can do is create a really clear and comprehensive track to closing right out of the gate. Because if we don't, their imaginations will run completely wild. So the moment you have a signed contract, it's really important that you've got a very clear set of communication that's happening, that's setting the record for the seller. Okay, now that this has happened, this is what's going to happen tomorrow. I'll have an update for you by the next day to confirm that happened, and so on, one right after the next, so that you're communicating with them regularly and it's all very systematic. Because if they feel for one moment that things aren't going the way they're supposed to be going, they're going to immediately start to get concerned that they did the wrong thing. But if every concern is already thought of and planned for, then they have nothing. They have no reason for their imagination to run wild. So what I mean by that is literally having in command or whatever system you're using a very clear kind of pre-made seller communication list from time of listing to time of contract to clear to closing, and then post-closing, so that along the way you're never missing anything and these people are getting touched all the time. I think beyond that, it's also important that you're constantly in that communication process, that you're, at step one, you're letting them also know what steps 6, 7, and 8 are. And that this is the time period we're going to get to them. Because one of the things I see happen, this has nothing to do with deals dying, but just people doing things in the wrong order, is just people jumping the gun on things. Really don't want to see that happen. But it all comes back to clear communication. So please do that. Please be in communication consistently, because again, we're talking about a seller from 2 years ago who just thought he robbed the bank and got away with it. So it didn't really matter. He was happy the whole way through. And now we've got a seller who's continuously wondering if they made a mistake or if they could have done better. So we have to be ready to go the other direction with them now and make sure that they stay on track. Now, when it comes to inspections, I know, pre-inspections have not been a super common thing. They got a little more common recently, I think, in an effort to try and get buyers to write offers without inspection contingencies. But I think moving forward, offering up a pre-inspection and selling the idea that, this is a great way for us to get an objective opinion that is going to be very similar to the opinion that somebody's going to be giving the buyer of their house, so that there aren't any surprises. Because sometimes there are legitimate surprises. But I think it's much easier for a seller to receive that information from an inspector than from their agent telling them this is wrong or that is wrong, or this may be a problem or that may be a problem. So that's a really easy way to, whether that's coming out of your pocket or the seller's, I don't care. I think that's an easy way to be able to open up that conversation with the seller and get them prepared for what's coming, or just actually make some of those repairs and move on. It's also really important that you take the opportunity to share with your seller what's normal now. Sellers generally are at least 6 months, if not more, behind on what's happening in the marketplace. So right now, if a seller gets a contingency removal with some demands on it, they immediately think it's a joke. It's not a joke, because now that kind of stuff is more normal than it was when your neighbor sold their house last year. So it's really important that you keep sellers in the reality of today, as opposed to the reality that they're going to expect, which is, whether it's 3 months, 6 months, 12 months ago, those things just aren't real right now. So those are the two things I would say on the seller side as far as inspections go: is set the expectation early, and offer up the idea for a pre-inspection. I think that's a great way to overcome some of those hurdles. And I think you could probably find a home inspector too who's willing to do those for a little cheaper than the normal cost, because usually the scheduling is a little more flexible and there's like less strings attached, because there no agents calling them because of they want to discuss it or anything. It's just, here it is, here's the report, you guys do what you will with it, and they move on. So not a bad idea. Now we're going to move into the last section, which is just communication. And like I said, communication is for buyer and seller. I want to start this by saying kind of what your perspective should be on it. This goes back to the beginning when I said people's perspectives are very different. At this point in time, because we know what their perspectives are, buyers immediately think they probably could have done better if they waited. Sellers immediately think they gave away too much and they should have been able to do better. If that's their perspective, if we're not in regular communication with them, they are going to drift off the ranch, and just their imaginations are going to run wild. I wrote something down this morning as I was thinking about this, and I said, relatively rational concerns turn into irrational fears very fast. And if we're not in regular communication with people, we have no opportunity to stand in front of that and have a reasonable conversation with somebody. And the further down the road they get, the harder it is to have a conversation that keeps them moving in the direction they originally wanted to move. So communication just for communication's sake is important. Obviously, good, clear communication that sets a path for them is valuable. But beyond that, letting them go for a week and a half without talking to them is damaging at this point and should not be done. So even if you don't have a whole lot to talk about, come up with something. Ask them about what, how their plans are going for moving so far. Ask them about, what have they got kids enrolled in school yet? Whatever it is, stuff that's not necessarily relevant to the transaction, but those conversations will quickly illuminate any fears or concerns they have, and will give you the opportunity, like I said, to kind of stand in front of those and deal with them in a rational and reasonable way, as opposed to once they get irrational, they start wondering if people are, purposely sabotaging them, or if lenders are not doing their jobs right because they asked for something they already got, and that must mean that something's wrong and they're going to deny the loan, or what, like weird, crazy stuff goes on in people's heads. And so it's super important that you're just there communicating with them, because if you don't, they're not going to call you. They're just going to continue to spiral out of control. So you got to be there and you got to be communicating. And then back to the same thing I said on the buyer side, it's important on the seller side with communication. I'm sorry, flip that. Same thing I said on the seller side is important on the buyer side, that you've got a regular systematic plan for how you're communicating with a buyer. The day we've got something under contract, here's the deal. Here's the contract. Here's some earnest money instructions. Here's the date you got to sign a loan application by. Here's the date we got to do an inspection by. Here's inspector phone numbers. Here's lender contact information, again, especially if they're still not working with somebody you recommended. It's one last shot to say, hey, in addition to dealing with PNC, it would be a great idea to call any or all of these three people to make sure that you're getting the best opportunity for yourself. So those things need to happen right out of the gate, and it should all be systematic. If it's not, you're going to forget to do it. And I don't want to hear anybody, forgetting about telling people how to deposit earnest money, or forgetting about, telling them what the inspection deadline is, because those are all things that will make everybody's life miserable if they're not done well, especially in a moment where a buyer's starting to second guess themselves and starting to wonder if they made the right choice as well. It's also really important that you stay in communication with lender and title throughout the process, especially if it's not people that you work with regularly. I don't think if you're dealing with Sean, Don, and Chris, if you're dealing with GM Title, you don't need to call them every day. They're probably going to call you more often than you are going to call them. But if you're dealing with somebody you don't know, you got to be calling them frequently. Because if the ball gets dropped, it's going to come back and get dropped in your lap, as opposed to the person who actually dropped the ball. So you have to always be prepared to do everybody's job until they've proven to you that they're going to do their job well. That's kind of has always been my approach to dealing with lenders and title. So that's those are my big pieces. Though a couple of things I want to ask of you guys, and then if there's questions, I haven't been watching the chat or anything, we can go through those. But I would ask of you guys, take some kind of action plan away from this. Add something to your tool belt from this, whatever it is you feel like you're lacking, whether it's a really clear system of communication with clients, or a better understanding of what's inside of a house and what things mean. Let's see what I wrote down. Just better scripts around expectation setting would be something else. But I think there's a lot here, and there's a lot changing right now. And so if you try to do business next year the same way you did it last year, you're going to experience some difficult moments. So we've got to be moving with the marketplace, and so do our skills. So that's what I've got. Do we have any questions at all?
It doesn't look like we have any questions right now. If anyone has any, though, feel free to leave them in the chat. We had a lot of people agreeing with some of the things you were saying in the chat, though. Can you leave your contact information in the chat, please, Andrew?
For sure. There.
All right. Thank you so much, Andrew, for joining us today. I'm sure that everyone had some great takeaways from this. And if you guys do think of any follow-up questions, feel free to reach out to Andrew. His information is in the chat. Thank you again, Andrew. And thank you, everyone, for joining us. We will see you Friday at the Clam Bake.
All right.